to sort this out in the next minute or two. How does that sound? Can you speak to me?
That sound, can you
Right.
hear me?
Yes. Right. That's
Okay.
good. Right. I think we've got good audio now. Just give me a 1, 2, 3 there, Sheikh Shahid.
Testing. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3.
1, 2. Right. Okay. Excellent. I think we're good to go. I hope so. Let's just see. Okay. So if you've got any issues hearing us, guys, please feel free to contact me via the app or via the. Okay, there we go. I'm getting good feedback here from the YouTube chat that the volume is fine on both sides. Okay, great. So just use the YouTube comment box, the live comment box to if you pick up any issues. Sheikh, I think we're good to go. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to you, Sheikh, and to those who are joining us, and hopefully more will be joining us. We've scheduled this discussion about 4 or 5 days ago, and I was very fortunate to be able to get Sheikh Shahid Mathee to be part of a discussion. And if I can quickly just reintroduce Sheikh Mathee. Sheikh Mathee is a lecturer at the University of Johannesburg in the Department of Religion Studies for quite a number of years. He has previously graduated from the University of Al-Azhar, which is based in Egypt, Cairo, Egypt, where he completed a degree and a qualification in Islamic law, I believe, Sharia wal Qanun, if I'm not, or just Qanun. You can correct me now, Sheikh. So, and then Sheikh Shahid made a name for himself, actually, when he undertook the ambitious project of working through a number of ancient or very old manuscripts in the ancient city of Timbuktu, which is somewhere in the Sahel region. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, which is, I think, the region just at the edge of the Sahara, and where Sheikh Shahid researched into hundreds of these manuscripts, deciphering them, translating them from the traditional Arabic language, and where he did some research on that as part of an African renewal project sponsored by the then South African government under President Thabo Mbeki, and did an amazing contribution to the advancement of knowledge of traditional African scholarship within that part of the world, and also received many accolades for his thesis and for his work on those old manuscripts. We're not going to, I would love to have another opportunity to listen to the findings of those manuscripts, but I think the focus of this evening's discussion is going to be on the state of Muslim scholarship training, or education, and that is really what we're going to try to explore and investigate. Now, Sheikh Shahid, Dr. Sheikh Shahid, is of course very well placed to enrich a discussion around Muslim scholarship training, because he's very familiar, of course, with the probably most recognized training institution in the Muslim world, namely the Al-Azhar Institute in Egypt, the Al-Azhar University, which is, I think, 1,000 years old. And going back to the 1100s, 1200s, I think so, maybe less than 1,000 years, almost probably 1,000, you'll be able to tell me. So I think, Sheikh, I am very, very honored and excited, and I'm going to really, I promise those who have tuned in and will listen to this broadcast afterwards, what I can promise you is that you are in for a treat. You are going to get information, ideas, thoughts, and experiences that is not very commonly available. Somebody that has really gone to the end of the world to seek education. They always say you must go as far as Timbuktu. And so what Sheikh Shahid has done is he's in fact been there, and he's looked at the institutions there, and he's here to share his experiences with us. So I'm getting greeted here. Assalam alive. I don't know if I should greet people back. Maybe they don't want to be, but since you've greeted, I'm going to greet you back. Wa alaikum salam. Alive since 1975. So, Sheikh, I'm going to then, after that, look, we go back a while in our previous discussion, which was a little bit less complicated because we just used the Zoom system, but Zoom, they control everything. I'm not able to do much on the Zoom system, and also they cut us down to 45 minutes. So today we're using homebrew technology. And for those of you who would like to see what it looks like here, yeah, okay, I haven't got a picture for you, but I can show you later on. I've got a lot of controls in front of me, and I've got to keep my head here. But Sheikh, I think after that, of course, Sheikh, you are also training students in some of the religious sciences, and so would love to hear the challenges that face you. So let me quickly maybe start by asking you this, and I think Sheikh, I'm going to dispense with the title I'm going to make it free for all for the next hour. I'm going to be buddy and use your name, Shahid, your beautiful name, and my beautiful name also. So I think just to cut a bit some of the formality, I hope you don't mind if I just go for Shahid in short, and we'll do the Sheikh thing when we have a formal occasion again, or the doctor. I mean, so I'm going to let me quickly then come to my first area that I'd like to explore, and that is your experience and your thoughts on the state of Muslim Islamic education. Let's call it Islamic education, because, technically speaking, I don't think you have something called Islamic education. You have education, you have knowledge, you have truth. There's not Muslim truth and non-Muslim truth. There's not Islamic science and non-Islamic science, I think. But I think what we're talking about is the sciences that are particular to Muslim culture and Muslim society. Like, for example, history of Muslim society, the texts pertaining to Muslim history and Muslim society, or the Qur'an, of course. And so maybe I could refer to it in brief as Islamic education. But what Shahid, would you say, after having spent, I think in excess of 10 years studying at university in the Muslim world, and being involved in Muslim education or religion education now, what are your immediate thoughts and experiences? Is there anything that comes to mind that you can think about, the status of education at the universities like Al-Azhar?
Okay. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Salatan wa salaman ala man la nabiyya ba'da Muhammadin wa ali tahirin at-tayyibin wa ala ashabihi al-muntajibin wa ala jami'i anbiya'illahi wal mursalin wa ala man ittaba'ahum bi ihsanin ila yawmiddin. Respected Brother Anwar, if you'll allow me to say Comrade Anwar, I think in that way we dispense with the formalities, but Comrade is also very homebrew, and we speak in that we are, that's camaraderie, or in Arabic is az-zamil. To you, to all our respected friends who are attending with us, let me start with Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to all of you. Let me also express my shukr and gratitude to you, Anwar, for having this program in general. You know, this is, I think, to start with, it speaks to this about education. You refer to education, to knowledge, and this is what we have to do. We have to educate ourselves. We have to educate one another. We are both teachers and learners at the same time. We listen and we exchange ideas. Of course, sometimes some of us will bring more to the particular discussion than others, but nevertheless, we are friends in this imperative, this need and this will to educate one another. So to all of you, so shukran, Anwar, for this program, and secondly, then shukran for inviting me to be part of this noble activity. I am indeed honored to be here, and I want to say shukran again to everyone who is present, so that we can listen to one another and talk, even though as because of the deal tonight, it appears and Anwar will speak a bit more, but I can assure you that when we're going to listen to you, your comments, your thoughts, your questions, all that contribute, all these things contribute to our own growth. Anwar, an extremely important question that you're asking. And of course, in that sense, the fact that you say, ask me what is my experience, it makes it subjective in the sense, of course, because we all have different experiences. And I think it's important that we recognize that, of course, notwithstanding that we have subjective and our own individual experiences, it is true that there is an objective reality in which we study. We encounter the same issues, we encounter the same potential, we encounter the same problems, we encounter the same difficulties, we are frustrated together, we celebrate together. So yes, I'm an individual, so I'm going to share my experiences and my thoughts, but I'd like to think that I'm not alone in that. And again, precisely because we have a joint program, we can reflect together. Of course, you, Anwar, you spend I think about 3 years at Al-Azhar. So, and you know the tens of discussions we had at your house, often starting on a Thursday evening to the early morning hours, 2 o'clock. And precisely this question that you asked, this is not a new question. I mean, these are discussions we had, of course. In the meantime, and we thank Allah, Alhamdulillah, and with humility say, I think I'd like to think that we have grown, that we have reflected on those questions. Other questions came. Other questions came. We found certain answers from our experience and we all the time negotiating, we all the time reflecting. But in your house and with Sheikh Safiullah Khan, with Sheikh Hassan Pandey, with Maulana Taha Karan, and with other brothers, a brother from United States, Brother Taha, also from Tanzania, another Taha, and Brother Shahid. And we had these discussions. So, but now back to the question, you know, my experience and thought of Islamic education. And I also want to say, you know, it's important that we see what is education and we seek the truth. I perhaps want to use the term the Islamic tradition. But before we even speak about an Islamic tradition, what is a tradition? A tradition is not something about the past. A tradition is always something that's in the making. You know, it is something about the past, at the same time located, you know, in the present with an outlook towards the future. So we receive a tradition that those who lived before us, and when I say those who lived before us, I don't just mean, say, people like Al-Shafi'i or Al-Imam Ja'far or Sheikh Al-Mufid or Abu Hanifa. Our parents, those immediately We speak about Imam Abdullah Harun, we speak about Panguru. But that tradition we've received, we preserve that tradition, we add to it. Because the danger is, of course, if we just receive that tradition and it's fossilized and we think that we cannot do any contribution. I would like to think that those who came before us, if they would know that we simply reproduce, we simply just say we can call those people, that they will be disappointed in us. They would have wanted us to be critical of them, to add to it, and that we leave something for posterity, for the generations who are to come after us will do exactly the same. So tradition is always something in the making. It's not something fossilized, not something about the past. And so when we speak about tradition now, I think, and coming back, let me start saying I think there are lots of good and there are lots of things that we've received from the state of this current Islamic. And let me just use the term for now, Anwar, in light of your question, Islamic education, my experience. I think there's a lot of good. If I think back of Al-Azhar, whether I of course, I focused on fiqh. I went into issues like Sharia al-Qanun, and my majors, to use the modern university terms, my majors were fiqh, usul al-fiqh, or what is called Muslim legal theory, fiqh, Islamic substantive law, and these were my majors. Of course, there were other faculties, because remember Al-Azhar talking about a tradition around in 1930s, and this is the impact of colonial rule. Um, Colonial rule had its impact very, very pervasively. So Al-Azhar, for example, let's say prior to colonial rule, used to go and sit in the masjid, attach yourself to a sheikh or a scholar, in the halqa, and then you could move around. You could move from this sheikh to that sheikh. There wasn't like if you want formal schools, you went to attend circles of learning, they called halaqat. But with colonialism, Al-Azhar was then, if you want, quote unquote, modernized. So now by the 1930s, after some of the changes, some of the reforms that took place in the curriculum, now Al-Azhar became like a school. You had primary school, junior secondary, senior secondary, and then you had the kuliya, or the faculties, or the university, and and then they had now different faculties, like Sharia al-Qanun is one faculty. I'm talking about the Islamic, the quote-unquote Islamic faculties. So you had Sharia al-Qanun, and that was divided into two. Sharia Islamia only, and then Qanun, which means like modern civil law, right? But in both of these branches of Sharia al-Qanun, fiqh and usul al-fiqh were studied at the same level and the same intensity. Then you had usuluddin, or what is sometimes translated as divinities. So you had, for example, there you had hadith, tafsir, aqidah and falsafa, and da'wah. Then you had kuliya al-lugha al-arabiyya. Then you had, they call it the Faculty of Arabic Language, and that was really linguistics and focusing on language. But you also had journalism, and history and civilization. And then there was one college called Kuliya Dirasat Islamiyya wal Arabiya, where it was like a conglomeration of the three other two, but like on a lesser scale. So I was in Sharia wal Qanun. What I've noticed, and also what helped me notice this was teaching at UJ. I realized in coming back and having discussions with people, and of course there's lots of discussion in the Muslim world. There's lots of question on what is our tradition. Does it need to be reformed? Does it not? What is the state? This very question. My experience, Anwar, was that it's not so much. If I look at the literature we got to read, the sources that we read, is that so much is left out of this great legacy, this great knowledge tradition that was produced over 1,400 years. We read arguably 5%. So in other words, and of course, all of us are limited by our education, given that, education is not like you go to school, you come out of school. In our modern life today, you have to do many other things. So it is my one experience is that precisely the first critique is that many of the teachers just told us what our forebears told us without giving a critical look on it. And that argument is not because I think they don't have the ability or they don't want to, but there are factors like time. People have so many jobs. In Egypt, Anwar, that many of these lecturers were doing 3 or 4 jobs. Also there was the state clamping down. So the state in itself, the political order, does not want critical thinking, right? So those things. But if I'm to say, come to the curriculum only, was that we are not studying all the works. So, for example, when I finished Sharia al-Qanun and fiqh was my major, as I say, in usul al-fiqh. Yet, if you ask any student, or or let's say as an average, I want to use the word an average student, say an average overall, to read the Risala of Al-Imam Shafi'i, we can't read it. And we've graduated from it, and Shafi'i was a faqih, right? We can't read the Risala. And this is not, I'm not speaking about non-Arab students, I'm talking about including Arab students, because the language in which he wrote, what his aim were. So, for example, we don't study the Risala. By doing so, we can follow the trajectory of a tradition. We don't, for example, read the book Abu Yusuf's Kitab al-Kharaj, which is an early book of this alim who's advising the state, who's advising what is called on political governance, is advising Harun al-Rashid. And in fact, there are things in these texts that if you read them carefully, you will see that things that we've come later to hold as unchangeable, these people had different views. In other words, they in that sense were much more progressive. In other words, and you can see this is how this knowledge developed, how the evolution of this knowledge. So a simple example in Kitab al-Kharaj is that the universal view among Muslims today, Sunni and Shi'i all together, is that Christians and Jews and people who are not Muslims cannot go into the Kaaba. It's only for Muslims. And of course, now Muhammad bin Salman has changed it, and I'll come back to that point. Yet Abu Yusuf in his book tells you that during the time of Hajj, Christians and Jews came into the Kaaba at the time of Hajj to come and present their issues to the Khalif, in this case Umar bin al-Khattab, to say to him, we're having difficulty, I'm an old man. And so here you see, this is a simple example, but it is very significant for us to see that way. And then you can ask a question. If somebody says, no, Christians and Jews and those people can't go to the Kaaba, then we have to ask the question. And my aim is now not to say that Christians and Jews now should just go straight into the Kaaba. My aim is to say, can we see how knowledge have changed, how different circumstances. And this is what I speak about tradition. And from my experience and my thoughts, coming back to that question, is that our current education is not critical enough. It does not fully appreciate our great legacy, this complex legacy. And Anwar, you will later talk what you dealt with, inshallah, in your thesis, in your PhD thesis, on what we call ontological reality and epistemological relativism and all that, because I think that will be important. But that's what I'm saying. So if you go to Darul Ulooms today, including Al-Azhar, is that firstly we study a fraction of a very, very wide legacy. We don't study in a critically sufficient. There is critical approaches, but not critically sufficient. And what I mean with that, it does not prepare the student. It doesn't give us all the tools to be critical, and therefore the student has to, him or herself, take it up, unfortunately. And let me, by the way, say, this is not only true for Islamic seminaries, this is even at the modern universities, Anwar. Often people just go to university, get their degrees, and just take that as the truth, and without questioning. And I think that is my experience. My experience is that there's this almost lack of will to be critical, that we've become that the only way we can protect our tradition is by not touching it and just implementing it. And therefore you see that often students who study in the ulums, and so they come back and they often don't have answers, not because they are bad, not because they don't want good, but because that is their training. Their training is inadequate. I'll stop at that now.
Yeah, because Shahid, today was the Jumu'at, and on Fridays you really get a sense of how far behind the Muslim scholarship is. Right now you are able to access any lecture all over the world, and on Fridays, normally I tune into about 10 or 15 different sermons. I take them one by one and I go through the list. And I don't even want to speak about the local scene. Today I was at the mosque, and as with so many other mosques, and I think there's close to 1,000 mosques in this part of the world, and what you get is a sense that the preacher, the person standing in front, is detached from reality, or they are perhaps attached to reality, but to a very superficial part of reality. So they would, for example, address issues that are really symptoms or tangential to the core problems within our society. Like I had today, one of the lectures I heard was speaking about how you should not post derogatory things on Facebook or on TikTok or whatever. And instead of a more intelligent and in-depth analysis of social media and what the purpose is that social media plays, it was dealt with in such a trivial way, in such a reductionist way, and you see, Shahid, I'm going to quickly, just give me a second. I just need to. Can you just comment on that, Shahid? How do we get our scholars to be less trivial in their approach?
Anwar, I think, and respected friends, it's our education. We're all limited by education. Like I say, that many of those who speak, and that is what I want to say is that people are well-meaning, and we should appreciate that when the khatib speaks, and they are well-meaning, but it's exactly we're so limited by education, the lack of tools, the lack of giving us that ability to understand our world, how we live in that world, how we function. So the problem here is primarily, it speaks to your first question, Anwar. It experience to our experience through education. In this case, in our Muslim institutions, in our madaris, in the Darul Ulums, whether primary education or basic education, secondary education, then what is called tertiary education, even Al-Azhar. So we are not given those tools. We are not given the skills. We are told exactly that somebody has taught for you 500 years ago or so many years ago. Just implement. So the problematic here, the difficulty lies with our education, and that has to change. But education, as we know, is not only in the masjid, is not only at the Jumu'ah khutbah, is not only in institutes of knowledge, but at home too. So this is the problem. And so the khatib who comes to speak at Jumu'ah can only speak what they know, but the one unfortunate thing is that those who come from Darul Ulooms are taught that you have got everything, and that's severely problematic, to say the least. That we should be able to say that no, I don't know. The other problem is that dialogue, unfortunately, because of the political reality, or because of politics, dialogues, we are taught not to do dialogue with one another. We are taught that somebody is dangerous who has a different view. Be careful of that person. And of course, there are people with dangerous views, and there are wrong views. We're not relativists, we're not perennialists where everything goes. But in order for us to know, so that ideas can speak, we got to listen to the Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If you want, spoke to Shaitan when Shaitan refused to bow. Allah is the creator. Allah Jalla Jalal was not in need to ask, did not need, Allah did not, he knew why Shaitan didn't bow to Adam. Yet Allah teaches us the tradition of dialogue. Okay, devil, you refuse to bow to this creature whom I blew my soul into. Adam, you refuse to bow. Tell me why. Of course, Allah knew. That's what we believe. Allah knew why Shaitan, but Allah is giving me a chance. What Ahlul Kitab, the Quran tells us, Ahlul Kitab, let us come to a common understanding. With the Mushrikeen of Makkah in Surah Saba, Surah number 34, the Prophet is to say to Mushrikeen, وَإِنَّا وَإِيَّاكُمْ لَعَلَى هُدًى أَوْ فِي ضَلَالٍ مُبِينٍ. Either we or you are in clear guidance, right, or in manifest error. He doesn't start by saying I'm on guidance, you in manifest error. He says no, let's level the playing field. You've got an argument to present, I've got an argument. So but one of us are true. He doesn't start with I'm the prophet of Allah. he begins. And so I think that leg of dialogue, and sometimes we are taught in our madaris to mistrust one another. And so all these things, and now the point with all this, I can't grow. Because if I mistrust you, Anwar, I mistrust Brother Ibrahim Adam there, I mistrust, then I'm not going to learn from Ibrahim Adam. I'm not going to learn from Alive 1975, because why? I think it's dangerous and I think I've got all the answers. So this is the problem. And so then when I go to the mosque, I can only present what I've learned, and I don't know what are the pitfalls, what are the mistakes in my thought, how I can improve it, etc., etc.
Sheikh, I've got a bit of a development here.
Sure.
We, in South Africa, we have a crisis with our power supply. And I've just heard now that we've had a 4-hour power outage today. And it's been okay. We've got backup batteries and stuff. But I'm getting a warning that the batteries are running low because of this 4 hours. So we might lose this link. But I want to promise all those who are tuned in that we will definitely continue the discussion. If we go off if the live broadcast is abruptly terminated, then we will record, when we have an opportunity again, and add that to the discussion. So you see, Sheikh Shahid, what my problem is that we as a Muslim, I guess it goes back to the worldview, or to the departure point. What is our mission? What is our role as a community, as a community of believers, of theists, of people who have adopted the sacred code, the divine worldview? What is our mission? And I guess that's the departure point. Now, if your mission is to save yourself and go to heaven, then I guess you will be preoccupied with fidgeting with your fingers and with your toes and with your hands, and doing all sorts of things that you believe will land you in heaven. But if you believe that, if your departure point in terms of your religious outlook is that you have a mission to emancipate mankind from the worship of man by man, from the worship of men and the elite, then I guess your outlook on the education will be different. In case A, where you believe that your job here is to do all sorts of difficult endurance tests, like how long can you stay up at night and how many times can you move up and down, and these endurance tests, or stay without food, or travel overseas and go to Makkah X times or whatever. If that is your outlook, your worldview, your departure point of your religious world, then that will become, the education system will be shaped to allow that process. But if your worldview is the second, case B, where you actually have a role towards humanity, and that role towards humanity is to free humanity from all sorts of destructive tendencies and influences and enticements and also exploitations, because that is where the challenge lies. You see, it's in the exploitation of the weaknesses of man by those who are strong and powerful and shrewd. It's in our own weaknesses. And so what I notice in the education system is that the education system is geared towards a classical Christian to Judeo, or classical cultural religious worldview of Islam, and not the original, I believe, which is the emancipatory understanding of what religion is there for. I mean, the Qur'an itself, when we read the stories in the Qur'an, it is replete with stories of emancipation, of the story of an oppressive class that is hell-bent on enslaving the ordinary people or the oppressed people in their domain, whether it is Qawm Lut, whether it is Fir'aun and his and his elite, whether it is Shu'aib, the people of Shu'aib, the Thamud, the Ad people. The Quran is replete with these stories of liberation, and the Prophet's role being that of the agent of emancipation. So how do we get the education system? Because I do believe we share that outlook. You and me, we share that particular outlook on what the message, the divine message and the divine agenda is. It's an agenda of emancipation. How do we redirect our education system? And it's not going to be easy in places like Egypt because they are, in the grip of their own cultural and political reality. What are the options for us if we want to create a class of scholars that will have that emancipatory agenda, that will embrace that agenda? What will it take for us to create and to groom a class of scholarship that will have the traditional prophetic agenda, that will embrace that agenda?
Shukran, Anwar. To draw on a word, you start with that prophetic agenda. Just to take us as people of South Africa and talk about our struggle, because it's very important to remember the struggle. One of the things, of course, especially the church, even that majority of South Africans, at least nominally, were during the struggle and are Christian. And so, for example, during the apartheid era, the question came on how to resist against apartheid, right? And we know that the role that the church in one way played in legitimizing the apartheid state. So there were, for example, one of the priests in Soweto was Father Butit Lachale. Butit Lachale, there's this question, should the church get involved in the resistance? And with resistance here, we mean the armed struggle. Of course, it's a difficult question for many in the church, people like Ellen Bosak, people like Desmond Tutu, Frank Chikane. But Butit Lachale, for example, said, I can't let other youth die for me, my ability to speak. And he spoke about what's called prophetic theology. And prophetic theology used the prophetic mission, and was to speak up, to speak against power, to get involved, to question, to push the boundaries, and not only against the apartheid state, of course, other forms of injustice, other forms of practices. And this prophetic theology that Bukhari spoke stood in opposition to what was called state theology. And Anwar, you mentioned it because at Al-Azhar, in Saudi, in Muslim countries, you have the state kalam, the kalam that says we have to obey the rulers, even if they break our back, even if they take our money, that we have to stand for the gender inequality, that we have to see that, for example, how some are promoted in society against others. You see that, for example, there's a discourse that can speak about women in a particular way. And of course, I'm saying this knowing that I'm also critical in a particular way. I read the feminist feminism in a particular way, but nevertheless, feminists raise some important questions. So Butit Lachale spoke about, then we have the state theology that justifies everything, that tells us, as Ahmad Matar says in one of his, Ahmad Matar is an Iraqi poet, I'm not sure he's still alive. In one of his, he's got a very, what an ironic title called Asbabun Nuzul. Asbabun Nuzul, as we know, is in Quranic sciences that certain ayat were revealed because of certain happening. In other words, a certain event that took place was the reason for why a certain ayah or ayahs were sent down. And in this, it's a satirical, he's satirizing here both the political as well as the dini leadership. So he says, Inna قال لنا أعمى العميان. He says the most blindest of blind tells us إن تسعة أعشار الإيمان في طاعة السلطان. Those who tell us that 9/10 of your iman lies in obeying the sultan, in obeying power. Then he says وإن أجرم وخان, even if the ruler does a crime and betrays, walau rakiba ghilman, even if he sodomizes boys and young people, walau ba'a sultan, and he sells a country, like we see today happening around Palestine, and people tell you must obey them. And then towards the end of the poem, he says to people, فَإِنْ كَانَ فِرْعَوْنُ حَبِيبَ الرَّحْمَنِ. I'm confused. He says, if Fir'aun is the beloved of Allah, فَلِمَاذَا نَزَّلَ الْقُرْآنِ? Why is the Qur'an being revealed? He says, and I think the Qur'an, and I can't see إِنَّمَا نَزَّلَ الْقُرْآنِ لِمَنْعِ شُرْبِ الدُّخَانِ. The Qur'an is only been revealed to say that smoking is haram. So it's a satire, you see. He's saying this people, then we discuss exactly just smoking. Of course, I'm of the view that smoking is dangerous and we should, but that's a different view. I'm just saying I think we should look after our health. But what he's trying to say at that time, or for example, where your pants must be, because these are not, they are trivial in themselves, but if you put them in a larger context, they are part of state theology. It is these issues exactly that they get us to entertain us and not to speak about the real issues that you spoke about, the prophetic as prophetic theology, to stand up against the oppressors, to establish that all human beings are equal, that they be bred. And also, as you said, Brother Anwar, so this thing about if I'm just worried about going to Jannah myself, of course, we must be good people, we must do our salah, we must do our fasting, and we must be salihin, inshallah. The Quran calls upon us to be salihin. But when the Quran speaks about salih, it's not enough to be salihin, as to use your words again, the one who is just concerned with himself, but to be muslih also. One must not only reform ourselves, but we must reform society. The salih is an intransitive verb. It doesn't require an object. It works on oneself. But muslih is a transitive verb. It requires us to take that sulh, that fixing onto society. As Imam al-Hussein says to his brother Muhammad al-Hanafiya, he says, إِنَّمَا خَرَجْتُ لِطَلَبِ الْإِصْلَاحِ. I don't just want to make Yazid will have no problem if I just make salah. Yazid will be fine if I just fast. This is what the rulers of Saudi Arabia, if you fast, they don't worry about that. What they don't want you to do is to create that, as you said, Anwar, that environment, as part of the community of believers, is that we create that environment where Islah, where people can be salih and we contribute to it. So again, if you look at Mother Teresa, why did all the world powers, the hierarchy, like Mother Teresa? Because she said, go and Bhopal and suffer, and therefore all the governments accepted her and put out the red carpet for her. But take another great Catholic, because she was Catholic, right? But take another great Catholic priest, Father Helder Camara from Rahmatullah Alayhi, from Brazil. He said, when I give the poor people food, when I give them blankets, and I speak about, they say you're a man of God. But when I ask, why are those people poor? Why are they suffering? They say you're a devil and a communist. Because that they don't want. They don't want us to challenge those things. So this is what you're speaking to. If we are part of this community of believers, and again, I come back to Anwar, is the critique, is that we are limited by education, and education that doesn't. And therefore, in one way, we should, I'm saying, as much as we're critical, we should go out for dialogue, but say, look, man, what are you speaking all about? Are you speaking things that are going to benefit humankind? That's going to change life, because Aqidah is about pop. It's about eating a staple diet. Is about fixing the lights now. I mean, many of us can at least, we're now getting used to this load shedding, but there are people who don't ever touch a plug switch on electricity in this country of ours, so there are those things that need to change. And when we speak about the things that are on the ground and not only under the ground and in the heavens, but as you said, Anwar, it's our departure point.
Yeah.
And we have to remind, and we have to go into discussion with our brothers, with the imams, and say, look, it's not right what you're speaking. And sometimes they speak things that are wrong, that are offensive. I mean, when as I said, when people speak about women, my daughter was telling me today, the Sheikh, at UWC, and this is a student, and he started out nicely, at least as I heard from her. I'm listening her side of the story, because I haven't listened to the khutbah myself. So he was saying, he started with speaking about Malik al-Shabazz, which is great, Malcolm X, right? Rahmatullah alayhi. And of course, the 21st of February marks his Yar Khatal, right? When he was, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant this great revolution, reward him on our behalf of all the oppressed and grant him al-Jannah. We're coming up to the anniversary of Mangaliso Robert Subukwe, Rahmatullah alayhima. So she says, and then he speaks about Imam Shahid, Imam Abdullah Harun, all these people. Then he speaks about Andrew Tate. Now, for those who've been seeing Facebook, there are lots of issues on Andrew Tate, this guy who embraced Islam, and apparently, and he's saying some very disparaging things about women, and so So she felt that she can't just sit in that khutbah. I said, okay, then what you do is then go up to the imam and speak to him. Let's have the dialogue. Say to him, I find these and these ideas offensive. Let's do it in a respectful way and things like that. She said she didn't have time because she had to go to class. I said, okay, then write to the MSA. Say to him that, look, when you speak about this guy, this is what he's saying. You realize, of course, she put in abroad that the imam was having his critique against feminism in the West and everything. That said, I mean, I understand that we have to be careful, but at the same time, we must have dialogue because the Jumu'ah khutbah provides somebody a space, and that space must be opened up. And I'll end off with this. When Umar bin al-Khattab, when he said, and I understand why he did it. In fact, to my mind, it seems like when he said that women are asking too much in mahar, and maybe he was taking a decision based on what he understood justice. But an old woman stood up and she said, no, Umar, it's not for you. And he listened. He listened as the ruler. He said, okay, this woman has a view and she's correct. I'm saying there was a humility on the part of Umar that we should learn from, that we can accept from, that here, and that's why I'm saying that the people should be able to, in the MSA, and say that, look, you said this and this, let's have a discussion on it. Let's give our views. And if what I found offensive, if Andrew Tate is saying if offensive things, he's now a Muslim, yes, but if he says offensive things about women, then it should be challenged. Yeah. I'll stop there.
Yeah. So, thank you for that, Sheikh. You see, the problem is, I can understand that the Muslim world is archaic, is parochial in the education system, and places like the Al-Azhar or even Medina to a worse degree are really there to reproduce the archaic and outdated ideas and rehearsed formulae that have been applied ad infinitum over the centuries. One has very little hope for those institutions to be emancipated from that archaic mindset. But what is really disappointing for me is that when you look at Western institutions, when you look at institutions in the US, and we do have a fairly global audience on this channel, so I have a fair number of people that tune in from the US and from the UK also. What is very disappointing to me, and of course us here in the southern part of Africa also, we have a number of very well recognized and highly ranked universities. In fact, I think 5 universities in South Africa is ranked in the top 500 global in the I think your university also is ranked in top 500 global universities, which is quite an accolade. I mean, there's more than 10,000 universities in the world. What is very disappointing is that even in Western settings, Western settings where the Enlightenment, where freedom of thought, where critical analysis or critical engagement is well received, even at these Western institutions, when you see the Muslims do research or do investigation, do social science or whatever that is connected to the Islamic sciences, they tend then to go back to the ancient archaic ways of doing research. And they then, instead of then getting research, let's say, for example, let me take a quick example here. Let's say if we can have Muslim research on the destructive influence of third wave feminism or the ultra-liberal degendification or androgenization of society, because what we are seeing is a veritable attempt to genderize society, to androgenize society, to eliminate the feminine identity and to eliminate the masculine identity. That is what we are experiencing. So I was hoping at Western institutions we could find a Muslim scholar that could draw from the Qur'an, draw from the Muslim Turath or legacy, and construct or design a strong refutation of this this present movement, or the normalization. I mean, I know this is it's a contentious area to dwell into, but if we look at the perversion of sex, and how sex is raised to a core or a key or a foundational identity, form of identification for many people. And Muslims are brought or caught into that mindset. But yet, I don't see any Muslim research that is offering some sort of unique or different understanding. Maybe a few people left now, but let's see.
Okay.
Let's just quickly see. Okay, so right, so we are back on the.
I can see. Yeah.
You just need to switch the phone back on, or maybe we can try for Skype. Would you like to switch your camera on Skype?
And then Skype, I can do that.
Just switch your camera on, and then we can try and put you through Skype.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. There are still 8 people there, so.
Okay. Must I switch the
okay.
phone off?
That's good. That's good. I can pick you up. So yeah, let's quickly. Okay, Shahid, you can continue. Sorry, would you like to continue with the point you were making there?
Yeah, no, I think in light of what you said, your critique of even in the modern university, the positions and often the predicament of Muslim scholars, of course, certainly it's something to think. I'd like to think, Anwar, there are people working, but this means there's another problematic that we know very little about one another, except, the efforts. I'd like to think, Anwar, there are quite a few people who have the same concerns that, or let me even say the same concern about our worldview, our point of departure, of raising issues. In this case, in this case, the modern university, and here the added problem is that often Muslims find ourselves, there's this, of course, is the hegemonic discourse of modernity. The modern Western university, is that the university is now become, the superior indicator of what's knowledge. And this is the typical Western worldview, that is the Archimedean point, that is the point zero. And often when we go into Western universities, we think of ourselves as almost become with a type of inferiority complex. And this is, of course, the problem that facing not only Muslims, but throughout the world. There is the hegemonic discourse. And we also have to realize that the malaise and the stagnancy that has set into the modern Western university, we see it increasingly, where people are producing scholarship that play up to the big powers. For example, those who are in charge of the commanding heights of the economy, that you get funding only for certain types of scholarship. This is in the Western academy too. People like George Bernard Lewis, when scholars are now not speaking truth to powers, Edward Said is saying, but rather peddling and justifying the falsehood of empire. So let's, for example, take the whole modern system of Descartes. So if you are a typical student if you're a student and study philosophy, study Descartes. Descartes is great as the father, who's often as the father of modern Western thought, So Descartes, I think, therefore I am. And of course, Descartes, that the world is what you, the individual, make of the world. Yet we find a thinker like Enrico Dissel from Argentina. Enrico Dissel says that Descartes could not have emerged. When Descartes said, I think, therefore I am, if we relate it to a broader field, he says, I conquer, therefore I am. He says, we must see that Descartes, of course, is born at the end of the 16th century and produces his work, the Meditations and the Discourse on Methods, around the 1630s, at the end of the so-called religious wars towards the end in Europe, but also in the midst of the conquest, Spain conquering what is today known as the Americas. So he says that you cannot read data outside of I conquer, therefore I am. In other words, the modern European thought and modern European thinker can only is created, if you want, of course, not created as in Allah, but as in our second distorted creation, if you want, because Europe conquered. So there is no Deka without the conquest. And worse than the conquest, as Enrico Dissel says, is that I exterminate, therefore I am. Modern Europe could only, the exterminations that they carried out in South America. We just need to read the work of Bartolomeo de las Casas, that Christian priest, of course. We see how they consider the Indians as people having no souls. And when they finally decided the so-called Indians, of course, was because those people never call themselves Indians. Then they came to Africa. And because the Africans, black people, were seen as people outsold, therefore they could be enslaved. So Enrico Dissel, if you study philosophy as a student, you're gonna read Deka. This nice thing. Deka was just sitting. He was, of course, marching with the armies in winter, as he tells us in his autobiography, in the Discourse and Methods. He will tell us that he was sitting in a stove in winter, and now he's thinking out his philosophy. And true, Deka was, of course, sitting alone in his writing. But Dissel says you cannot take the subject, the individual, outside of the broader environment which contributed to his or her creation. And so Anwar is to say, now when we come to this very, very, very important subject of third wave feminism, if you talk about the veritable to degenderized society, these very dangerous moves, and here we must be clear. We must be clear on this agenda to illuminate the feminine and the masculine. The Quran is clear that there are two خلق الزوجين الذكر والأنثى. This and so if I understand you correctly, Anwar, your critique is firstly, where is the Muslim response? I would like to think something is happening. I would like to think our discussion here tonight contribute to that. But you are right that there's got to be more writing on this, to say that how do we understand from that, to use again your point, is that the community of believers, those who put God at the head, that Allah is central to us, and Allah who's created us certainly knows how we think what is good for us, and therefore that we can then work for a refutation of this movement that seeks to degenderize us, that seeks to make sexuality, specific understanding of sexuality, the order of the day. So certainly, I think that's part of our task, Anwar. I'd like to think there are people writing. We need to find one another, and I think there are many and it's precisely with discussions and fora like these that you are having discussions. And I want to say here, brothers and sisters, all of you are so present. Our presence is a tremendous contribution, whether we speak or we just listen, whether we give the talk or ask the questions, the answers, but all of us are contributing, inshallah, to the concerns Anwar has and the concerns that he raised, and also the implicit answers that we give. And remember that the correct question, the proper question, the question that is thought out very carefully, is already half the answer. That's not a cliche. That is true. Because, we don't even ask the proper questions. And coming back again, I'll end here tonight, is that when the khatib speak, when they speak on radio, when they go to mosque, we haven't begun answering the questions, but we're giving answers. How is that? And this is where the problematic lies, is that we're not asking the pertinent question that affect society, that affect our youth, our young women and young men, because they have many questions. And we should be able to say that sometimes I don't know the answer, but the fact that I don't know the answer doesn't mean there's no answer. It means we're going to find those answers together. And the problem is that with the current religious discourses, that it is taught that they have all the answers and there is nothing to learn outside. And I think that's also part of my experience.
Sheikh Shahid, so the challenge I think is how do we establish a common language even, because if you take the traditionalist approach to scholarship in the traditional Islamic sense, then I don't even think we, like, for example, I'm going to take one trend within the broader ambit of Muslim scholarship, namely the Salafist trend, or the Ahlul Hadith or the Atharist trend. And that particular trend, well financed, well promoted from certain key quarters like Saudi Arabia, and in fact pushed in a way by some forces within the Western world, in fact. That trend, for example, which is extremely visible and present at Western schools even, and I see the product and I see the protagonist and so on YouTube, so that's why I'm raising that particular example. There's the scholarship, the language, the paradigm of research and scholarship even. Does it really allow for or admit to scholarship that transcends the strict location or the idiosyncratic location within a Muslim context? And I'll give you an example. Like, for example, now the whole identitarian push at Western schools or Western universities, the postmodern multiple truth paradigm, where any meta or broad or universal narrative is regarded as naive and sort of it represents a form of autocratic or tyrannical look at. So the sectional narrative or the sub-narrative and the idiosyncratic approach to scholarship is then favored above scholarship that has transversal or broad or universal application or validity or relevance. Of course, for us to promote an emancipatory agenda, our scholarship, our paradigm, our research needs to have a transversal and a universalistic relevance. Because how do you emancipate people if you are detaching them from the systemic issues? And what modern Western schools have done is they've become complicit in perpetuating oppressive structures, in the sense that they refuse to do a systems analysis or to do a systemic structuralist analysis of our problems, instead choosing to do a sectionalist. In other words, to look at the problem as gender issues or as toxic masculinity or as racism. And when the only model in which they can integrate these issues is through the concept of intersectionalism, then, where they then not do a systemic analysis of our problems, but do a multiple sectional analysis, which doesn't amount to a systemic analysis. And so what the Salafists do, and I do realize that I am a bit flying above the clouds here with maybe some people, but if you bear with me, you will get the gist of where I'm getting at. So what schools like the Salafist school in Islam does is they locate themselves neatly within this multiple identitarian postmodernist paradigm, where they then argue for a Muslim truth to live in harmony with the truth of other, anti-Muslim or anti-Islamic ideas. And, there's a character like Ilhan Omar in America, who identifies as a Muslim, but also identifies as a alphabet or LGBT activist, and playing a very central part in that movement. So the idea of coherence, the idea of broad integration doesn't arise. So because you have these multiple truths living side by side. And so the Salafist is very comfortable with it. You know, he comes with these strange and unrealistic vision for society, a vision of society that disregards all modern or contemporary challenges and just tries to do a reset to an age, 1400 years ago or 1300 years ago. So unfortunately, we then have that problem. We have a scholarship, we have a paradigm problem, we have a problem where the Muslim scholar is not even able to articulate in any broad, systemic way the Islamic or the Quranic vision, and they are left to articulate that Islamic vision within an idiosyncratic Muslim sort of silo within an incubated Muslim environment. That is where Islamic research belongs. Whereas, I mean, if we regard ourselves as emancipators of mankind, our research, our work, our investigations cannot be in a little silo called Muslim business or Muslim affairs. How do we escape that reductionist or that limitation on our scholarship, so that we can articulate our ideas, the beautiful directions and thoughts in the Quran, to a broad, to humanity, where I can argue with a professor of science or a professor of sociology in similar terms and in common terms. I can advance the Quranic or the Islamic vision for, let's say, gender, the role of femininity, the role of masculinity in society. How do we move from this to that broad articulation? And I mean, we have spoken about this, but any thoughts?
No, again, Anwar, I mean, I don't have any particular answers, and I think we're learning and we're beginning to find ourselves, on this. So, 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 so while I don't have any specific thoughts right now, but I think the mere fact that we're talking about this is in itself a way, inshallah, to answering those very, very important questions, and to speak to those areas that the problematic that are facing us. I mean, and just for example, to show the tragedy, as you say, the Salafists who locate, or if you want to, Salafi thought that locates itself in this multiple, as you say, the agenda of this that I love, just postmodern reality. But the same discourse is so hard against Muslims, would not accept other Muslims. So it's not accidental that Ilhan Omar, for example, can accept LGBTQT and this degenderizing, as you say, but at the same time can argue why sanctions against Iran must remain. The same person who is so compassionate in her view, of course, her distorted notion of a theology of compassion, for degenderizing society, human society, cannot see how dangerous and the harm that sanctions are the harm that sanctions cause against Iran, that people don't have medicine. Where is this person's compassion? And this is you say, part of the broad Salaf identity that the Quran says, "Ruhama'u baynahum." The same thing that can say a Muslim is going to hell for making Mawlid al-Nabi, for example. Here, this it's precisely that moment that this discourse suddenly no more believes in multiplicity. When if I'm to use your word again, the idiosyncrasy, if we speak about idiosyncrasy as something positive within the Muslim tradition, where Muslims have different approaches, where if you, for example, there were those who always made music in the Muslim, or there are those against music. That's fine. They don't want to have music. But then there were always Muslims who had music, since the very beginning of Islam. They wouldn't recognize those type of idiosyncrasies, let's call it a positive one, but yet will locate themselves firmly within that Western hegemonic identity because where they are just one, where they accept the partners, and where they accept themselves is just one among many. And then again, it's not incidental that Muhammad bin Salman, for example, can come and now in Makkah, and the same people and could now bring in music the way he brings in Halloween the way they bring it in, because now suddenly there's an openness. But when it comes to Muslims, you see, then there's not that openness. And yet, Anwar, if we want to, if we would dig a bit deeper, so, for example, in let us what is called so-called Salafi thought, yani al-fikr as-Salafi. Yet, oh, and I'm not talking about the ones now that arise also in the modern state in Saudi Arabia, but even a controversial figure such as Ibn Taymiyyah. Now, there are lots of things to be critical of Ibn Taymiyyah, but Ibn Taymiyyah was also not simply that, if you wanted, it's called a fanatic. So, for example, if we read some of his fatwa, Ibn Taymiyyah had fairly, if you want, good views on certain things. I don't, Anwar, my point of departure is that somebody is not absolutely evil. I think Ibn Taymiyyah did some very bad things that we should be critical. As a philosopher of history, he had some very weird views. He, for example, justified the killing of thousands of people in Lebanon, justifying the army of An-Nasir al-Qarawun, in favor of the state, for example. We spoke earlier about state theology. But Ibn Taymiyyah, for example, held the notion, according to one scholar, Shihab Ahmad, who died about 6 years ago, that, the notion of the satanic verses, that is Surah Najm, that the shaitan did, quote unquote, reveal certain verses of the Prophet. Ibn Taymiyyah's reading was that, well, these his notion, for example, of the Prophet being ma'asum, what is isma? His view is that even there could, and I disagree absolutely with this view, but let me just tell you his view. It's something to say that how Muslims were thinking about these things. Early Muslims, a person like Ibn Taymiyyah, that the shaitan, that the Prophet did, if you want, articulate those views shaitan said to him, but the Prophet did not insist. When Jibreel alayhi salam came to him and told him what had happened, the Prophet then said, this was a mistake. So, for example, that is his notion of isma. Yeah, in Saudi Arabia, the modern Saudi Arabia, for example, this notion of 3 talaqs are equal to 3. Ibn Taymiyyah takes the view that no, 3 are not equal to 3, but equal to 1. So and then we can speak about other Muslim scholars throughout. A person like Ibn Hazm, for example, often quite eccentric in certain issues, often a bit rude when he speaks about other scholars, how he differs with them. But for example, Ibn Hazm would tell us, we have this big issues, especially like say 30, 40 years ago when our mothers, may Allah subhanahu, and I say our mothers, I don't mean only our mothers, that which involves our wives and our daughters, when they were pregnant or they're breastfeeding, and they missed many days of fasting, because, they, for example, and then when you think, oh, ya Allah, I have to catch up 3 or 4 years, sometimes 10 years of fasting, right? So the madhahib say that, no, that, and especially if the woman broke fasting because of the fetus while she was pregnant, or because for the sake of the child, is breastfeeding. All the scholars say that no, she must do qada, or not only qada, and give fidya still. Ibn Hazm comes along, he says that anybody who says a woman who broke a fast, was pregnant, or was breastfeeding for the sake of the child or the fetus, he says, what kind of people are you who don't have mercy? This woman broke her fast because she was concerned for a child. Therefore, she should not know qada at all, nor she should give fidya. He says, in fact, those who are asking someone to give fidya is accusing them of theft. Now, what I'm saying is that whether we agree with Ibn Hazm or not, just that we see that how Muslim scholars thought very differently, how they were within that, and what the word used, that coherency, but yet there was there was enough room for them to differ. Ijtihad, for example, can women be judges? Can they not be judges? And things like that. Standing up to the ruler. The many ahadith, contradictory ahadith. For example, the hadith that the leader could only come from Quraysh. No, that we know is a later view. Is that there is what do we do with a hadith that says, وَعَلَيْكُمْ بِالسَّمْعِ عليكم بالسمع والطاعة وإن تأمر عليكم عبد حبشي له الزبيب برأس بالزبيب. You know that you should obey even if your ruler is an Abyssinian slave with peppercorns on his head. That is I'm just saying the hadith as it is. So we see a person like Atufi, for example, coming. Tufi, and again, you don't need to agree with him. I'm just saying to you, I'm just sharing what he says. According to Atufi, he didn't write an independent check. He says, whenever Quranic ayah or hadith, and there's an apparent clash between it and the public welfare of the ummah, then public welfare takes precedence. What the other scholars, of course, did was to sideline him and say that this guy was astray and everything. But nobody ever said kufr on him, right? Al-Ma'arri could write, Abu Ala al-Ma'arri was sometimes, he was making fun, for example, of Muslims and everything, but he was writing. Muslim scholars did not, I mean, some did, but there was not the state ideology where they said, okay, you just refute him. They wrote refutations of that scholar. So those who are Salafis, they don't, even the Salafis don't read all their so-called scholars and their text. And this is, of course, general problem. It's not only that. So if we're to be critical of the Salafis, and of course, Salafi in its broad understanding would include all. Salafi is in the predecessors, the Sunni Shi'i. Al-Bukhari, for example, we read Al-Bukhari, Imam Bukhari, and we know only Jami Sahih. Yet Bukhari was a historian who wrote At-Tarikh al-Kabir. This we are not taught in the Madaris. So, for example, Al-Bukhari had a critique of, today when we critical the hadith to say it's authentic or it's weak, we look at the chain. Yes, Al-Bukhari used to say, there was a hadith in his time, he said that Al-Bukhari did do matan criticism. He did. And if we look at which ahadith Al-Bukhari left out, then we can see that Al-Bukhari did matan criticism for certain political reasons. And I don't mean here that he was evil or is bad, that he left it out because he thought, in his view, and we can disagree with him, was that for now to challenge a particular problem of his day, it's better to leave certain hadith out. For example, he leaves out a hadith on Ali, on the election. Even though these ahadith that he left out met his own standards, why did he leave it out? Because Bukhari's concern was not only the past, but it was his present. He was addressing that the ulama should have a greater role than politicians of his day in the 3rd century of Hijri. Right? Al-Bukhari, for example, rejects a hadith that says the Ashratu Sa'a, the signs of the hour, that says it will happen in the year 200 of Hijri. He says, I'm alive and these things haven't happened yet. You see, but we don't get that from Al-Bukhari. So when we speak about the Salafis, it's true. It's because they have been so politicized and because they have stood so with the state power, and the modern state especially. The pre-modern Muslim state allowed for much more leverage, It is the modern state created by the West, that has sought to bring the ulama much closer, to almost create a type of papacy. Now, I'm not saying that wasn't there before, but I'm saying in the modern state, that is why now you suddenly have a state mufti. It starts with the Ottoman Empire. There was never a state mufti like we have in Egypt, Mufti ad-Diyar al-Misriya, in Saudi. There was never a notion of a grand imam that is aligned to the state. The scholars were not always opposing the state. They didn't ask for revolution against the state, and we can be critical of that. But they were not close to the state, as happens in the modern state. And therefore, one can understand the Salafi. And this is one critique of Ibn Taymiyyah, that unlike other scholars, Ibn Taymiyyah was too closely identified with the Mamluk state. Because when scholars start believing that the state is the only way, I'm not saying we should be enemies of the state. For example, one can understand today the Iranians say the Islamic Revolution was an important state. So our aim is not here to say that we should oppose the state and there should be no state. I don't subscribe to the anarchist thought or anarchist thinking. But at the same time, I'm saying is that many of these scholars said that we're not going to ask for revolution against the state, but we will be critical of the state in our own way. Whether that was sufficient or not, that's a different question. So we should be critical of that. What I'm just trying to say is that, so the Salafis today don't know the legacy of Islam. That is why you see how they supported Saudi Arabia, especially from the 70s and the 80s, the havoc that was created. Because as you pointed out, Anwar, Saudi Arabia sponsored so many things, so many madaris in the world, and the havoc Allah knows they created, the hate they created between Muslims, telling us to be obedient. Saudi Arabia, for example, What they didn't tell these Salafi scholars is that Saudi Arabia, for example, supported Renamo, the first Christian fundamentalist terrorist organization in Africa and Mozambique that cut open pregnant women's bellies, saying that because you are supporting Frelimo. Saudi Arabia supported this. They didn't tell their students this. Saudi Arabia supported John Garang, the South Sudan Liberation Army, against Islamic government. And of course, when I say that, we can be critical of the Islamic government in Sudan, about Hassan al-Turabi. But just to say, if these people knew that the same Saudi Arabia was telling them to be puritanical Muslims and to regard as mubtadi'un or bid'atis, those who make Mawlid al-Nabi and all these things, this the same very government who supported Christian fundamentalist groups, and of course with the United States, they may have had a different view. And that is, again, it comes back to the early point, as you said, Anwar, is that we don't read, we don't know our legacy, we have fossilized what we receive without looking at it critically.
It's a bit of a doom and gloom note, and I'm not going to end here because I want us to be positive and to see where are the opportunities and the bright stars of look, there are. I mean, I know you, and I know a handful of other people who studied religious sciences and who I can comfortably communicate with, and there's a growing fraternity of voices on the internet, even where people are taking a new line, forging a new pathway, and in fact going over the heads of these institutions and schools that are not catching up with reality, because our people demand it. Our people have a choice. They either have to abandon their commitment to the Islamic way, or to the way of the Qur'an, or to the divine worldview. They must abandon it if there's no practical and realistic guidelines coming forth, or they must just make it up as they go along, which is unfortunately what I notice, is that a lot of people are taking a sort of a supermarket approach to Islam now, where they basically please Caesar and they please God, and the Christian model, of rendering unto Caesar what is due to him and to God what is due to him. But that is, of course, very far from Islamic worldview. So it's very heartwarming that people like you, Sheikh, who come from a tradition of social activism, who are in the business of education because they want to engineer transformation. And I can't see any other point to education than transformation. If education is only something platonic, is only something that affects the brain waves and the thought patterns and the intellectual understanding, then it doesn't have real world. But what I do notice is that there are more and more people that come to this channel also. I notice that they want to find a way to relate the Islamic understanding with their day-to-day life against all odds. So what I want to ask is, if there's anyone that would like to brave the publicity and whatever the public profile you might get, feel free to put a call through. There's the number there. Look, we are doing our first real live trans sort of broadcast, which includes various platforms like WhatsApp and Skype, and we've got other software, so it's a bit touch and go. But I think we're doing relatively okay under the circumstances, and we can only go better from here. So if there's anyone that wants to really throw a question at Dr. Shahid Mathee, or just make a general comment, you are most welcome. In the last 5 minutes, when we're going to round off, I'll await your comments. You can either call WhatsApp the number there that you see, and I will relay your voice to the microphone here, and you'll be part of the discussion. Or you can just simply type a question out. If you have any ideas or any criticism about the way that we've dealt with the topic, feel free also to help me to understand how we could improve, how we should do it differently. Shahid, you know, this tonight was actually meant as a celebration because the channel that we started as a small discussion group a year and 8 months ago, which you were very much part of, that original once or twice that we met, grew to 1,000 subscribers. Can you believe that? And there's 1,000 subscribers that are that have joined the channel, and so it's a great it's a source of great inspiration for me that there are many people that are tuned into a better understanding and the approach that we've chosen. So Sheikh, you know, maybe on a bit of a lighter note, you get plenty of students coming to your classes, and I do believe the current mayor of the biggest or the most powerful economy in Africa, Johannesburg, the capital or the economic capital or the economic hub of Southern Africa, I believe the mayor is actually a product of your department. Am I right?
He wanted to come and do his honors, so he didn't. Yeah, he didn't get the chance to do what is called the RPL. So he finished his education at Darul Ulum. So he's as part of that structure, he's a Maulana, and then he came to do an honors at UJ. Unfortunately, I think he got busy around 2016 and he couldn't complete. So he was just beginning classes. So he's not a product of UJ, but he studied at the Darul Ulum. But now, after he became mayor, in fact, that same week after he was appointed mayor, he came to UJ to come and now continue his honors. So UJ in South Africa has a system that all those who didn't do formal education, in apartheid South Africa, the only education was so-called white Calvinist education. So if one didn't go through the formal schools, you were regarded as having no education. So the one good thing of this new South Africa was that they have the system called RPL, recognition of prior learning. So even if a person remained at home and never went to school, it doesn't mean that person doesn't have any knowledge. So if a person, for example, can prove that he or she read Shakespeare. And in fact, there was a guy, so-called colored guy, I understand, in the Karoo, who had read all Shakespeare's work, and university students used to come to him. So then that accumulative knowledge, and the universities would recognize it. And even if that person didn't have matric, I mean, some people only have grade 5, grade 7, would then be admitted into honors or even undergraduate. So that was a good thing. So he is part of that because, you know, his father's origin from Malawi. He grows up in Soweto. Many kids couldn't have education because of the economic realities. You know, kids had to go, they dropped out in school. So many, and here, Anwar, I'd like to say the Darul Ulooms did throughout the world. They did. We are critical of them, but the Darul Ulooms did to a great contribution. At least it gave some students some form of education, and they can now come. Of course, we should be critical of them. But so that is about the Mayor Anwar. So inshallah, he will join us now to do his honors. But I want to say, Anwar, I know it sounded a bit gloomy, my previous point, but I'm optimistic, Anwar. These very programs give me a lot of room for optimism. All of us here, I think we inshallah, of course, with humility, we do dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that Allah will listen and see our efforts inshallah, as long as we're sincere to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, each and every one of us. But I'm very optimistic, Yani, that
can I pop this? Can I ask you this? You were in Algeria recently. What is your experience of their scholarly fraternity?
Yes. Look, I was there for 2 weeks only, and I think there's a lot of activity taking place. I've seen a lot of things of Hifdul Quran and so. But again, Anwar, it is not sufficient. But let me also say the context. Look, this was a state project, and that's again, as I said earlier, the critique. When states want to control, take over activities, then you must know there's a particular agenda. Look, I think they are very, very well located and entrenched in the traditional system, the Maliki, Ash'ari, Sufi system. But again, my critique of it, it is one that is to be controlled by the state, by the Algerian state. And often the Algerians have realized they've got a big rivalry with Morocco. The biggest, unfortunately, this is the reality of Muslim countries. For Morocco, the biggest enemy is not Israel. In any case, we saw that Morocco unfortunately signed the peace treaty with the Zionist enemy, right? Their biggest enemy is Algeria, because again, Algeria supports the Sahrawi, the independence movement in Africa, the last state that is still not independent. So for the Algerians who were always more aligned, if you want, quote unquote, secular, so they've seen that the only way they can rival Morocco is through is becoming more Islamic in a particular way. So now you see there's this contestation. For example, in the Sufi orders, if Morocco is big on the Tijani order, and the founder of the Tijani movement was born in Algeria. In fact, I went to his birthplace in a place called Anwar. Right, so the Moroccans have taken that over, because this Ahmad Tijani finally moves to Fez in this late 1700s and the early 1800s, and he dies there. So the Moroccans have appropriated them. So now the Algerians are pushing very much the Qadri. So you see here, two Sufi orders are actually used for political contestation and political supremacy in the Muslim world. So it was a very nice trip, but it's quite clear that unfortunately, this notion of the state should control everything. So the modern Algerian state is now, okay, we will say which Islam again is allowed. And of course, we have to recognize that the Algerian state is very revolutionary. After all, the FLN, the Front Liberation National, the Liberation National, who fought against the French. But again, it's unfortunate when the state sees itself as controlling everything. So the people we met are those, of course, who are following the state ideology, the state theology, if you want.
Yeah.
So I didn't get to see many, but of course, in Algeria, we went to the Maqam al-Shahid, the big museum built for the Shuhada, all those who died fighting against the French,
anti-colonial struggle.
Anti-colonial struggle. I mean, Al-Arabi and Al-Muhidi. This is the guys who are killed before the revolution, unfortunately. And unfortunately, just after the revolution, the French, those who were aligned, those Algerians who were what we would call sellouts, who fought on the side of the French, they switch sides 1 year over, and they subvert and they appropriate the revolution. And so one of the guys who is executed in 1964, the youngest colonel in Algerian army, his name is At-Tahir al-Sha'bani, and he was saying that no, we should only retain those who were in the French army for the technical knowledge, but he's executed by his comrades. He's 30 years old. In fact, 2 days before his 30th birthday, he's executed because he speaks truth to power. So we see that, and unfortunately, modern Algerian state, and this is the same problem. Of course, I'm not going to compare Algeria to Morocco. Algeria supports the Palestinian liberation struggle. Algeria was part of the non-aligned movement. Algeria trained and gave money to the liberation movements as opposed to Morocco, But there is that critique, Anwar, that at least that I've picked up, is that it's a new Islam that the state wants you to, and those who are in charge, So there are people, of course, and I didn't see the whole of Algeria. I was only at 2 weeks. I was in a very tight program, let me say, that, the governors came to meet us at the airport. So it's kind of funny, the governor of every state. I mean, the governor is like the premier of the state coming to meet you at the airport, shaking your hands. And that is also the problem for the Muslim world, that I am not anti-state. Let me say that. I'm not saying there should not be state. As I said, I don't follow anarchists. But when the state is setting the agenda, then we should, to say the least, we should be worried, because it inhibits us to express and to grow. And I think that is the malaise of the Muslim world. But Anwar, again, and respected brothers and sisters, please, I don't want to be doing
No. I hear you. I hear you.
There's a
Look,
lot of good taking place, and we should be optimistic.
yeah,
It was a
no,
nice trip, let me say, a
yeah,
beautiful trip.
okay. And how does it differ with Timbuktu and with Mali? Because you did spend quite a bit of time in
Yes,
Mali.
yes.
How
No, actually,
how does it
it's the
compare?
same tradition. It's the very same tradition, you know. Like let's speak formally. They all Malikis, Ash'aris, and
Okay.
you have lots of good scholarship. You know, in fiqh, the fatwas are great, and you had great scholars. You know, over the centuries, here and there, who really cared about society. You know, Algeria produced Alal, is it bin Badis? You know, Malik bin Nabi. These Malik bin Nabi is a scholar. I think we should become familiar, Anwar, and all people, because he wrote, he was anti-French, and he gave a new way forward. So Algeria produced new scholars, but as in so far as it to Timbuktu, it's at least the same traditional scholarship. Remember, then Algeria is also more modern than Timbuktu in a sense, as the greatest state. Timbuktu is, as you said earlier, it's in the Sahel. It's a small city or a small town in the desert. The modern Malian state didn't pay too much attention, and therefore there are these security issues now. You know, Al Qaeda groups and also nationalist groups such as the Azawad National Liberation Front, seeking to create a state for whites. You know, since the 1960s already. But the same knowledge tradition. I'm not sure. I would like to think that they need to do much more work. You know, to create the greater ummah reality, or you know, strength within that region. But I mean, I saw many people coming from different parts, you know, to this conference that I attended also in December, giving their views, and you know, and you can see the scholarship coming from Africa. I'm talking about spiritual tradition, not critical now. If we're to talk book knowledge, and so, oh, you know, our brothers from West Africa, subhanallah, you know, their levels of it, how they speak Arabic, their fluency. I mean, I think some of them speak better Arabic than the Muslim world, than the Arab world, you know. So you see, there is great potential. The question is how to harness, how to so that we can apply, you know, invest that potential to create greater and more beautiful realities. So there are raw materials, Anwar, is the plants. If we are, you know, in programs like this, that's going to take that raw materials and say, inshallah, more fruit will come out. But I think there it was just beautiful also to visit the desert. For me, the desert is the most beautiful place in the world. Going into the Great Sahara, you know, seeing the oases, it's just very beautiful.
Did you get to ride on a camel, Sheikh?
No, no, unfortunately, I didn't get to ride. We went to some, we were supposed to, but the Algerians control the program very tightly. That was a problem. I would have liked, I thought there was, but you know, you just go here. Even when we visited the Maqam Shahid, you know, they literally gave us 45 minutes. And I said to
Yeah.
them, no, you know, for us, and especially we in South Africa also understand the struggle. Maqam Shahid is, if and that is how we honor those revolutionaries who gave their lives, who were exiled, who imprisoned, who died. We have to spend at least half a day there, you know, so you can see what the modern state will take you there, but we only want you to see that much. So they didn't give us chance to ride on camels.
Yeah, yeah.
I would have liked to got onto a camel.
You know, it's not as much fun as it looks when you see it on TV. Unfortunately, I got cajoled into getting on a camel in Egypt a number of years ago, and I thought it was going to be fun because you know, I saw it in the movies and I saw it on TV. First of all, you sit very high up when you sit on a camel. You sit like 3 meters up from the, and it's a long way down to fall. And then the camel is not as even as a horse. You know, the camels, that hump tends to shift quite a bit, and then when you come down a dune and you hit the level sand again, all sorts of things happen. And yeah, I just want to say before you go, just do a bit of prep work because I was caught off guard. I almost came down from that camel. But Sheikh, on that note, I think I hear what you're saying. There's a lot of responsibility on us, on those of us who are advancing our own understanding maybe on forums like this, on YouTube, who have chosen to, seek out what is really and what is real and what is fictitious. Because we have a rich legacy, as you say, and there's a lot there, but there's also a lot of, I would say, superfluous information. And there's also a big gap in terms of contemporary information that we need to analyze our own problems. So I'm going to I accept that challenge. That is what we are here for, and with people like you around to support and to add your perspective, I think there's a lot of hope for this type of forum to grow and to share information and knowledge. If you look at the internet, there's really a few patterns of thinking, and that is, people want to speak about the hadith, about the Salaf wants to tell us about about Ahmad ibn Hanbal. This hadith said that hadith said that. They are unwilling to apply their minds. And I know you, as a scholar who has done extensive research on the Jafari, Ithna Ashari worldview also, you know that you cannot be relevant without being critical and without being intellectual and real in your analysis. If your analysis is not located in contemporary reality, you will be creating solutions that are detached from reality. And what unfortunately on the internet, most of the videos that you see, a guy will start by quoting a verse from the Qur'an with an antiquated, outdated reading of that verse. And sometimes, the reading is not even obvious from the verse. And then sometimes they will add to that a number of hadiths and quotations from various books. And that is really the sum total of how they want to address a particular problem. So let's say, for example, like we have a clerical fraternity in this part of the world. And they were under pressure to give guidelines in terms of same-sex marriages. And the way they basically responded was in a 7.2-page response in which they quoted a few verses, and also, I don't think they even went to hadiths, but those verses were simply a very flat surface reading of some of the verses of the Quran, and in no way would be able to withstand the might or the intellectual force of the fraternity that is pushing the idea. So, they could have created a response for Muslim consumption, but in terms of a response that is suitable and palatable for broad society, I think they've succeeded in that. And so that is what I'm saying. The internet we need to create a forum where we can offer that type of analysis that is not just drawn from a superficial reading of the hadiths and from the Quran, but where we actually do a rational, intellectual analysis, and from there construct arguments that can stand up to any, in any forum. And
Anwar, so I think you raise an extremely sorry. I
No problem.
understand we're probably at the end of the program.
No problem.
But this that you say, and this has been really, if it hasn't been destructive, it has not been helpful. It's called the atomistic approach to the Quran, where we take a particular verse from the Quran, or not even the complete ayah, part of the ayah. Let me give an example. So in the traditional, or in the classical, let me say traditional, because that tradition is something that is dynamic. It's something that we add on to. In the classical fiqh, you have, let's take the issue of if a Muslim kills in a premeditated murder a non-Muslim, and I don't like to people, say a Christian, a Jew, a Hindu, an atheist. So most of the fuqaha have the view that the Muslim must not be killed. even if the Muslim for execution, if we because the Quran says in terms of the laws of the institution of qasas. So, and why do they say that the Muslim must not be killed for killing a Christian or a Jew, even if it's premeditated murder? So they go to an ayah in Surah, towards the end of Surah Nisa. This ayah says, and it's part of the ayah, it's not even the complete ayah, it says, وَلَن يَجْعَلَ اللَّهُ لِلْكَافِرِينَ عَلَى الْمُؤْمِنِينَ السَّبِيلَ. That part of the ayah. The ayah says, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not give, and I'm just giving a very literal translation here, Allah will not give ascendancy, superiority to the kafirs over the mu'mineen. Right. So their argument is, if you execute the Muslim for killing a non-Muslim, then you're giving superiority to kufr over iman, because the Christian or the Jew, in their view, or the Hindu or whoever, that person is a kafir. Now already let's leave that. That understanding of kafir is already flawed. But this ayah, if we look at it in its broader context, the ayah is here speaking, and the ayah here is a rebuke of the munafiqeen. The munafiqeen in time of the Prophet, the munafiqeen, why they called munafiqeen? Because they see which side they think is going to win. So when in the battles they saw the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they thought Muslims are weak, then they aligned themselves with the kuffar. And the kuffar here are those who challenge the Prophet, those who want to harm the Prophet and Islam. So instead of looking, if you look at that ayah that way, so now the ayah is not even legal in any way. It's got no legal purport. But they gave, because of this atomistic approach, they gave this Quranic ayah a legal meaning. So in other words, it's dealt with in fiqh. Right? So they said that you can't kill the Muslim for killing a non-Muslim because you're going to place kufr above iman. But they didn't look at other ayat in the Quran that says, the ayah that Allah is making killing haram, وَلَا تَقُلْ نَفْسَ الَّتِي حَرَّمَ اللَّهُ إِلَّا بِالْحَقِّ, and وَمَنْ قَتَلَ نَفْسًا بِغَيْرِ نَفْسٍ وَفَسَادٍ فِي الْأَرْضِ فَكَأَنَّمَا قَتَلَ النَّاسَ جَمِيعًا. Had they approach what is called the thematic approach to Quran, taking all these ayat together, then they would have understood the message of Al-Quran Al-Kareem. Now, there's a very important scholar also. There's another scholar called Ash-Shatibi. So Ash-Shatibi, for example, comes, he says, now, then is the deductive approach. How do we know that, of course, for most say, how do we know that Salah is wajib? So many, and this is what we thought, and that's why I said earlier we are limited by our education. So the deductive approach, this Greek syllogism, in Greek logic, is that the Quran says wa aqimus salah, establish regular prayer. So the word aqimu is a command tense verb, and command tense verb is obligation, therefore salah is obligation. Now Ash-Shatibi was a very interesting scholar. He comes and he tells us that no, the deductive approach is not enough. He says if anybody goes to the Quran, leave the hadith one side, the Quran, and says that salah is obligatory because the Quran says wa aqimu salah, establish regular prayer. He says that ayah in itself does not benefit any certainty. He says for us to know that salah is obligatory, we have to look at a lot of things put together. The Prophet's praise for salah, the threat against those who make salah. You put all, and then reason. You mentioned reason. He says, is that all, so what is called the rational proofs, in other words, such as Quran and Hadith, together with reason. And Ash-Shatibi said this at the end of the 8th century in his important book, Al-Muwafaqat. I'll just read one sentence, perhaps from his translation from, he says, this being that pure reason divorced from Sharia principles and unable to yield religious moral values, reliance must be placed primarily in Sharia proofs in deducing law. But according to the common use, these latter either have no certainty at all or very little. In other words, if a person just comes and throw a Quranic ayah just out, that means nothing, Shatibi is saying. A person, and this is the problem. So you, as you said, the Salafis, he gives you one ayah in Quran or half of ayah, says that this is the proof. He says no. The ayah just like that gives us no certainty at all. He says because these proofs are taken one by one. He says, rather, you must put them all together. You must look at grammar. You must look at how the Prophet spoke. You must look at total practice. all these put together, like if you have one stick, we now easy to break the stick. But if you put all the sticks together, then they give certainty. And this is called the inductive method. So Shatibi was telling us that we must use not the deductive method, but the inductive method, because that is, and here you bring disparate things if you want together, but they have the same overall meaning. And this is the problem, Anwar, and let me end here, like I say, with the deductive approach, and therefore people just throw ayats left, right, and center, and they bring one or two hadith that have no relevance to this particular ayah. But and this is one of the critique that we must have of our education system that still at Al-Azhar, is this atomistic approach to the Quran, taking one ayah, then you can say, yes, the Quran says men are superior to women. Then you can do that. Then the Quran is encouraging slavery because the ayah speaks about slaves. And we can say, you see, the Quran has established slavery. But to do so is to fundamentally distort the message of the Quran through this atomistic approach.
Thank you for that, Shahid. Let me just quickly give a shout out, or just take the gist of some of the messages that's here. Maybe there are some people watching on their TVs and they can't access the chat on YouTube. So I just want to read a few there. Farouk says we need to establish a central place to house the study of modern world concepts as we reflect on the Quran. There are so many enlightened young minds needing a home, so many fields to study. So I think that that sentiment, I think, is what we share with Farouk. Then Isaac says, I believe all we can do is strive for truth and implement it in our world. The reward and success will come in the next life. The Sunnah of the Prophets is always one of struggle. I guess that is at the bottom of it all is we invest the effort and the results would be the domain of Allah. Another message from Canada, Salam, listening from Canada. I'm originally from SA, now living in Canada. That is from Fatima. And then Kamil says, Salam all. I understand exactly what is said, and I concur. Speaking about myself, when I many times feel to empower myself with Quran, I feel overwhelmed with the amount of information and where I should start. That I can so relate to that point, is that feeling of being overwhelmed when you are a person that is trying to make the ethos of Islam a reality in your family, in your home, with your children, because you are literally being challenged on a hour by hour basis. People, your children, your own children, your colleagues, your family, your friends will basically test you in every aspect of trying to implement the principles that you stand for. And many of those principles are not grounded. I mean, some of the ideas that we've been assuming for all our lives, in recent, when I reread my texts, my religious texts, including the Qur'an and Hadith books, in the past 7 years, there were so many of those practices that I found did not really have a basis. I made a video on the Taraweeh Salah, one video, and I raised the question of where is this really based? It's not based in Quran. It's not even based in Sunnah. It's not even based in any post-prophetic Sunnah, and so I like one of the Khulaf, like Abu Bakr, or the person who instituted it also did it for his time, Umar. But just that's just one example, is that we have to take stock of everything we thought we knew, and we have to find a way of calibrating again and seeing, look, where are we? What is it that we can identify that is solid, that is sound, that is not an imposition, but is really has roots in our sacred text. And I think that what I sense here, and maybe a topic for another discussion, is how do we as ordinary people make sense? Are there a scholarly fraternity that is helping, that is offering? Because you get these people who are reproducing ancient understandings and praxis or approaches. And they are indiscriminate. There's no discernment in them. They're basically just reproducing. Whereas I think our people deserve to know what are archaic, what is outdated. I mean, the fact that you are promoting certain views of women, for example, that they should not have any education, that they should, have babies and not have any sort of life. That is very real. There is an official established perspective or point of view that is promoting that kind of archaic understandings. And so what Kamil here is saying is that he feels overwhelmed about the amount of information and where we should start. And stay tuned to this channel, and we will try and fill that gap, Kamil. We will try and fill that gap. So Shahid, I've taken a good chunk of your evening. It's 2 hours, and you've been very, very kind and very generous with sharing your time. By the way, I did not promise Shahid any payment, people, if you think he's volunteering his time. I was on another channel once, Shahid, and I didn't know it, but actually you get paid on that channel. Not bad, $50. And I didn't accept it. I declined the offer, but it was nice to know. I mean, $50, that's a lot of money in South African currency. That's like 1,000 rands. And so unfortunately we're a poor channel. We don't have $50 to give you. All I have is my gratitude, Shahid, and to say to you, thank you for sharing your ideas, and we must do so again one day. And I hope the viewers have found something beneficial in what we've spoken about. You've certainly shared a lot of very, very pertinent, important information. And if there's any other contribution, if not, then I think I'm going to ask Sheikh Shahid to maybe give us a few parting words. You can tell a joke also, Shahid, anything. I mean, we're open. If you, whatever. I think it's late. It's getting late, and some people maybe anything you want to give us in parting can be any thought that comes to mind.
And Anwar, shukran. I spent on the last days of December 2022 and the first few days of January 2023. We had 3 nights or so of very good discussion. I'd hope that next time you will discuss that again, because I think those are very, of course, the work that relates to your own thesis. But I want to thank you for those days. So if there's any payment, you've done the payment already.
Alhamdulillah.
So there's no need for that. No, and I think that those are very, very important, fruitful discussions. Inshallah, hopefully, unless you've already done it with the group and before, but if not, that I will please ask you to speak about that. Let me say shukran to the group. Sorry, in the end, as much as I try to escape from it, they say, the quote unquote, the sheikhs, they don't know when to keep quiet.
No, this is YouTube. So they can just change channel if they get tired of you. You keep the going.
That's so you can give it. So I don't know. You see, there's a problem. We always assume people are listening or getting fed up.
No.
In the meantime, they may be doing something else. That's great. But I want to say shukran to them. I mean, I can see at least. But I do realize that people listen carefully, So if for those of you who sat through all this, if you survived Alhamdulillah, you didn't get, nothing happened to you because I sometimes think if I listen to so much, I get tired. So I hope you didn't get tired. But Jazakumullah to all of you. I mean, the names I'm going to, because there are few names alive since 1975: Ibrahim Adam, Kamil, Fatima Chan, Isaac M, and Farooq Sheikh, and the other people. Shukran so much for listening, for your comments. It means a lot. I think when we talk to another, we listen. Hopefully, inshallah, next time you'll also give and speak. But Jazakumullah to you and everybody else whose name is not here, whom I, of course, don't know, for being here. And once again, Anwar, shukran. I think this is a follow up to our discussions in January, December 2022, January 2023. Shukran. As I said, we had these discussions in your house in the period 1991 up till May 1993. We still got to thank your wife for Nazli, for her patience, and your kid for Harun, and yeah, Harun was the only kid then. So it's a tradition. It's coming on long. Jazakumullah khairan, Anwar, and to everybody. And from my side, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Salam. Just final message here from our son. Many thanks to you two veterans. Oh, okay. I unfortunately joined a little late, but we'll rewatch. Of course, we should keep this going more often, please. Shukran. Thank you for that message, Hassan. And it reminds me, these same people that are writing are the people that started our little discussion a year and 6 months ago. And tonight we're celebrating 1,000 plus subscribers. And it's great for me to see the same old comrades, friends, brothers are back here. And we've had a few teething problems when I started. We were hit by the power cut halfway through, which we managed to reconnect also. That turned out to not to be the end of the broadcast. And so next time, all I can say is we've done the pilot run. We're going to run it much smoother next time. We might even get 2 guests in. And inshallah, I look forward to working with you again, Shahid, and to create more content for our precious viewers. Sabrina, Adam, salam, enjoyed listening. Yep, and please send us ideas. Don't hold back. I need to get your ideas. You know what? Now that we've mastered the technology of speaking to people out there, and we're not restricted to 45 minutes, and we can get more people on the screen also, yeah. And we're not using StreamYard software, and we're not using YouTube software, we're using our own in-house means of doing the broadcast. I welcome your comments, your ideas, your suggestions. Do you think the time is right, Friday, this time? Do you think we should make it shorter, longer? Please feel free. There's a link on the YouTube channel to a Telegram group. You can join the Telegram group, and there you can speak directly to us. There's about 50 of us there, and we exchange ideas and we share information there. So feel free to give your comments. Shahid, Assalamu alaikum. I like your headgear. You remind me of the Berber of Algeria. So you actually resemble those guys, eh? I must say, you can be mistaken for one of those Algerians. So again, Shahid, Jazakallah, may Allah reward you for having made this time. And to all of you that tuned in, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh. So, folks, I think we leave it there. And I look forward to speaking to you again soon. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.